All right, let's dive right in. We're tackling a monumental question today, one with consequences for, well, the entire planet. What happens when the Himalayas, the world's third pole, actually melt? And to kick things off, just listen to this. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, put it bluntly. Nepal is on thin ice. They've lost nearly a third of their ice in just over 30 years. Think about that, a third. This isn't some far-off problem for our grandkids to worry about. It's happening right now, and it's speeding up. So when we talk about the Himalayas, we're not just talking about the world's highest mountains. You gotta think of them as a critical planetary system. That's why they're called the third pole, because they hold more ice than anywhere else on Earth outside of the Arctic and Antarctic. And that third pole? It's starting to crack. And let's just try to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this place. The Hindu Kush Himalayan region, or HKH for short, stretches for over 2,000 miles. It feeds 12 major rivers that snake through 16 different countries. It is, and I mean this literally, a giant frozen water tower for a huge chunk of humanity. And that is why this matters so much. We're talking about 1.65 billion people. That's not just some abstract number. That's how many people downstream depend on those rivers for everything, for drinking, for farming, for their entire way of life. The fate of that ice is completely tied to the fate of all those people.
Okay, so let's get into the meltdown scenarios. What does the science actually say is going to happen? Well, first off, this isn't some vague what-if situation. It's a reality, and it's backed up by hard data. The link between how hot our planet gets and how fast that ice disappears, it's direct, and you just can't argue with it.
And here's the part that's really alarming. The speed. The acceleration is just unprecedented. Get this. Scientists found that the glaciers melted 65% faster between 2010 and 2019 than they did in the decade before. This isn't a slow, gentle thaw. This is a dramatic, high-speed acceleration. And this table just lays it all out in black and white. Look at this. Even in what we'd call the best-case scenario, if we manage to limit warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, we are still on track to lose up to half of all the ice in the region. Half. And if the planet warms by 3 degrees, that number jumps to a jaw-dropping 75%. And notice the confidence level here. Very high. The science on this is solid. And just to really hammer this point home, here's a quote from Dr. Philippus Wester, one of the top scientists studying this. He puts it in no uncertain terms. At 2 degrees of warming, he says there is no doubt whatsoever that we will lose 50% of the ice. So let's be crystal clear. This is not speculation. This is a scientific certainty. Now, all of this melting creates this really dangerous paradox. It's a crisis that comes in two phases. You get this wild swing from one extreme to the other. First, you get way too much water, and then you get not nearly enough. Let me break that down for you. So, right away, as all this ice melts out of control, the dangers are immediate and, well, they're violent. We're talking catastrophic floods, massive landslides, and avalanches. But one of the most terrifying threats is something called a glacial lake outburst flood, or a GOLF. Basically, these giant lakes of meltwater build up, and then their natural dams just break. The force is unbelievable.
And just so we're clear how big a threat this is, right now, scientists are watching 200 glacial lakes across the region that they consider a serious risk to people living downstream. 200. It's like having 200 ticking time bombs just sitting up there in the mountains, all created by this rapid melt.
But here's the tragic irony in all this. After the immediate chaos of floods and landslides, a much slower, more permanent crisis sets in. The pendulum swings the other way, because the very source of all that water, it starts to vanish. Just take a look at how incredibly dependent these rivers are on that meltwater. For a river like the Amu Darya, almost 80% of its water comes from snow and ice melt. The Helmand River, 77%. It's simple, really. As those glaciers shrink, so do the rivers that an entire continent relies on to survive. And that sets off a terrifying domino effect. First, you get widespread water shortages. That, of course, leads to crop failures. And from there, you're looking at massive food insecurity for nearly 2 billion people. The chain reaction is devastating. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Okay, this is a huge problem for that part of the world. But the truth is, this is a global emergency. A crisis on this scale doesn't just stay in one place. Its ripples are felt on every single continent. Let's talk about sea level rise, for example. We all hear about Greenland and Antarctica, right? The two giants. But what's wild is that all the other mountain glaciers around the world, including the Himalayas,
are responsible for about 30% of the sea level rise we've seen. 30%.
And just to put that number into perspective for you, that contribution is equal to the combined ice loss from both Greenland and Antarctica. Let that sink in. These smaller glaciers are having just as big an impact on our oceans as the two biggest ice sheets on the planet. They're absolutely punching above their weight.
And then, let's bring it back to the people. Because we're talking about 2 billion lives. That's a quarter of everyone on Earth. 2 billion people whose entire livelihoods are directly threatened by this disappearing ice.
And that leads us to a question that honestly has no easy answer. When a quarter of the world's population loses its water, its food, its way of life, where are they supposed to go? This is the kind of pressure that could trigger a migration crisis on a scale we have literally never seen before.
So, is it hopeless? What can possibly be done? Well, the scientific community is sounding the alarm, what they're calling a clarion call. They're saying, look, this is dire, and the window to do something is closing fast. But, and this is a big but, they also say it is not shut yet. There is still a path forward.
Okay, so here's the timeline the UN's climate panel has laid out for us. It's incredibly specific. For us to have any real shot at limiting warming to 1.5 degrees and saving a decent chunk of this ice, global emissions need to peak before 2025, like now. And then they have to be slashed by 43% by 2030. These targets are, well, they're incredibly tight.
So, the big question is, are we hitting those targets? Well, according to Dr. Wester, the answer is a hard no. He says the world is not doing enough, and he points to the fact that emissions are still increasing every year when they need to be dropping off a cliff. We're going in the wrong direction. But, and it's so important to remember this, hope isn't completely lost. The experts are really clear on this point. If we get serious about decarbonization right now, that small window of opportunity is still open. The choices we make today can still have a massive positive impact.
And that really leaves us with the one final critical question. The science is undeniable. The future scenarios are stark, and the clock is absolutely ticking. The window is closing. The only question left is, will we act in time?